This is the Freeheel Life Podcast, episode number 40. I'm your host, Josh Madsen, coming at you from the Freeheel Life shop in Salt Lake City, Utah. And we have reached numero 40. Number 40. Man, this is just flying by, and I'm pretty stoked, as always. And it just amazes me that we're already at episode 40. So thank you, everyone out there, for listening, checking this thing out. From the looks of it, it seems like you guys are enjoying it. So I appreciate you letting me babble on about my Telemark thoughts and share some cool conversations with people I've met along the way. It's been pretty great. As far as newsroom and notes, I got an email regarding, this is probably for you instructors out there. There is an event called Untitled that's been put on by my friend Scotty McGee, who is a PSIA examiner and all-around technical badass of the Telemark term. But he started doing this, I think, back in early 2000s. So I know I spoke at one of these things a long time ago at Snowbird. But it's basically where they get all of Intertelly's kind of more of an international gathering of Telemark instructors, and they kind of get everybody together and share ideas and whatnot. But I got an email. They were planning on having Intertelly 2021 at Panorama Resort in British Columbia, Canada. The email states updates on COVID and event prospects, go or delay decision. As mentioned in the initial announcement, Panorama Resort, CANSI, and Intertelly Committee will make a joint decision in early November about whether it will proceed with the event based on current pandemic and travel trends. If our forecast is to be able to host the event, we will communicate the message on multiple platforms to let the skiing world know. Event organizers have set a decision date of early November 2020 to reassess and determine if hosting the event in April 2021 is prudent. If not, the event will be rescheduled for April of 2022. So if that was an event you were interested in, that's the latest information. I know Scotty McGee's on the radar to talk to on the podcast at some point in the future. And so we can hopefully get some more information about that. If you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, please check that out. There will be a link in the notes, and you can find it under Telemark Skier Magazine. It's part of the Freeheel Life family, and it's basically the only YouTube channel where you're going to find all of our stuff. We've got videos from the shop, ski reviews, all sorts of little programming that we've started over the years. So check that out. We're always improving on it. There's videos every week, and we'd love for you guys to be a part of that community on there. If you missed last week's episode, it was with Lena from Telemark Kids Project over in Livigno, Italy. It was an amazing conversation. I had a great time. I love what she's doing with Kids Telemark, and it's a super inspiring story of her putting this together and how she's sharing Telemark with younger folks over there. And she lives in a badass spot up in northern Italy that I love very much. So if you haven't checked out last week's episode, please do so and let me know what you think. Today's episode, we are joined by the great Craig Gordon of the Utah Avalanche Forecast. Craig is the sole avalanche forecaster for the western Uinta Mountains, an area accessed primarily by snowmobile, and also handles much of the avalanche education for snowmobile groups. Craig has done avalanche control for Brighton Ski Area in Utah since the mid-1980s, and then worked as a helicopter ski guide. He has worked for the Forest Service Utah Avalanche Center since 2000. Craig developed the Know Before You Go Avalanche Awareness Program for young adults in 2004, which has been extremely popular. He's a surfer, East Coaster, and he shares my love of Joe Strummer and The Clash. So please welcome Craig to the show. All right, Craig, welcome to the podcast, my brother. How are you?
Oh man, I am doing so well. How you doing today, Josh?
Good, brother. It's good talking to you. I haven't seen you in a while since I don't even know if I saw you last winter, but I was like seeing you around town. I saw your 80s style party commercial yesterday, so that was cool.
Yeah, it's the run up for our 27th annual Utah backcountry benefit bash, and of course, it's going to look a little bit different this year with everything going on. But actually, we did see each other during the winter because if you remember, it was right around I think December 15th. You gave me a ping and let me know that you had a pair of first generation red T races, Scarpa T
Oh
races,
yeah.
my favorite boot of all time that I wore out in wearing them in 1997, I think is circa 97 those boots are. So man, you gave me the big hookup, and I have had happy feet ever since.
Oh, good. I'm glad, dude. I forgot that was this year. Yeah, that was like a long time project we were trying to put together. So that's awesome. I love that, man.
Yeah, for a couple of years. And I got to tell you, man, I'm so stoked for you and the niche that you have filled and fulfilled for our community, because it's just a remarkable thing to have a connection with the Freeheel world, and also a place to go for all things telemark. And it's really bitching that it's right here in Salt Lake.
I love that, man. No, thanks. That means a lot coming from someone like you, man. And yeah, and so just I guess for those, we know each other, but for those people that are listening, maybe give us a little background on who you are, what you do, and
Sure.
whatnot.
Yeah. Let's get to know everybody here, right? So, yeah, I'm Craig Gordon. I'm one of the forecasters with the Utah Avalanche Center, and I'm a transplant in Utah, originally from the East Coast. So I grew up as a surfer in Long Beach Island, New Jersey, and it might not have quite the kind of cerebral connection or cerebral visuality that you might think of New Jersey. Now, actually, if I were to blindfold you and dump you out where I grew up, you'd think you landed in Santa Cruz. And it was a pretty cool place to grow up. A barrier island 3 miles out to sea, 18 miles long. And so, yeah, since I was a little kid, I was out paddling in the Atlantic Ocean, and then also kind of developed and grew a love for skiing on the East Coast, which, if you're skiing or surfing on the East Coast, man, I mean, nothing is ever a given, so you sort of embrace the good days and you buck up for the crappy days, which is, the large majority of them. But I wound up moving to Utah after a trip. I sent myself here on a ski vacation with a local ski club in 1978, and it was a great storm cycle. One day it cleared up. I got off the top of the old Collins lift with about 2 feet of new snow, and I was standing there with my friend, and I'm watching a couple of Alta patrollers work their way across Mount Baldy, and they're throwing bombs and skiing powder. And I looked at my friend and I said, "Man, I'm coming back to do this." And, and he looks at me like, "Yeah, sure you are, man." And I saw that, and pretty much I set this time frame for destiny and made my way here to Utah under the guise of higher education. I got accepted at the University of Utah, but really I got accepted to the University of Snowbird. I scored a nighttime ski job, and or actually that was kind of Freudian. I said that it was a nighttime dishwashing
Oh,
job,
there you go.
which turned into a daytime ski job. So, I thought I could easily balance skiing and college, and I quickly realized that skiing sort of won out. And as I was moving my way around the mountain my first year or two, I again kind of had this allure with snow and avalanches and ski patrolling. And then in the mid 80s, in 1985, I scored a job at Brighton Ski Resort as a ski patroller. Worked my way up and throughout the ski patrol to where I was running the snow safety program, the avalanche forecasting program. Spent 10 years there. Went on for 2.5 years as a heli ski guide, and then scored an awesome job with an amazing group of people at the Utah Avalanche Center, and I've been there for the past 20 years. So,
Wow.
yeah, that's sort of my story, man, and I'm sticking to it.
Oh man, that's amazing. I didn't realize you were a heli ski guide. Where was that? Here in the Wasatch, or were you?
You know what? I helped a startup operation in the Western Uintas, and interestingly
Wow.
enough, that's where I forecast now, and it's a really challenging range to forecast for. So it is the most contiguous east-west running range in the lower 48. So, most of our major mountain ranges here run north-south, and the Uintas run east-west. Also in Utah, they are the highest peaks in the state. So they're a little bit east of the central Wasatch, which means they get less snow. They have colder temperatures, stronger winds, and that all equates to more challenging avalanche conditions. So yeah, I flew around there in some challenging conditions, and then with that background. After a couple of years with the Avalanche Center, we saw the need for a forecaster in the Western Uintas, and I had that background and experience and kind of carved that niche out for myself.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah,
Yeah,
those are not easy mountains to navigate. There's a lot of terrain to cover back there.
it's a lot of terrain, so yeah, it's kind of a gnarly place. I'm a little bit of a hybrid user in that the approaches in the Uintas tend to be like pretty long and arduous, and for such a large range to be able to see lots of terrain. Generally what I do, and we've got great partnerships with local snowmobile dealers as well as the manufacturers. So they hook us up to a couple sleds, and I generally eat up my approach on a sled, park at the bottom of a slope or at the bottom of, some areas that I want to look at, slap on my skis and my skins, and then just finish the day touring around and stomping around. So it's a pretty great gig. I feel super, super blessed.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, so back in '85 when you started, I guess where did your snow experience intersect with Telemark? Because if you came out in 1978, I mean, that's like right at the beginning of when you would even see a Telemark skier in North America. And I mean, what was it in the 80s that you kind of found Telly as you started traveling in the backcountry?
Yeah. Yeah, so kind of that journey, and the telly thing, man. It's I'm kind of a minimalist at heart, and to see the telly thing, growing up on the East Coast, and after my first visit, of course, Powder Magazine was just sort of hitting the newsstands, right? And I remember prior to coming to Utah for my first trip, reading a couple issues of Powder Magazine and seeing, this crew, and generally they were out of Colorado, but there were a few cats here in the Wasatch who were backcountry skiing and wearing Peruvian toques and wool, and it just looked like this really cool retro hippie thing, And I mean, I really dug skiing, and anybody that lands in this place or in a powder skiing mecca from an area that doesn't see a whole lot of powder snow, of course, you are super humbled. I mean, you can be a really
Yeah,
good skier until you learn how to ski powder, right? So, I
totally.
mean, that's just the first part of it. So, as I'm, investigating all of that, I guess I kind of plant the seed in my mind, like, these cats look pretty rad. Eventually I'd like to do that, and I remember stomping around, and it was that first trip in '78 around Alta, and seeing this crew of just like badass telemark skiers, and at the time, and the kind of gear that was around then, so I mean, it's super flimsy, leather-esque boots. I mean, my trail running shoes now have more support than like the Fabianas that people
For sure.
were on, right?
Oh yeah.
They're rocking like Europa 77s, or I mean, something that I would say like a toothpick that you would have gotten at a restaurant pre-COVID would probably have, more underfoot support than anything that anybody was riding.
It's like those like those fiberglass of pokies and stuff.
Yeah, pokies, right.
Yep.
The pokies.
Those are like actual toothpicks. Like when I Wild Rose, it was a really cool shop here in Salt Lake.
Yes.
When I was growing up, it was like Wasatch Touring and Wild Rose. When Wild Rose closed a few years ago, that guy got a hold of my number and called me and took me in the basement, and it was like he showed me a pokies, and I was like, oh, what? And I have them on the ceiling now, which is cool. But yeah, it was Galibiers and a pokies he was showing me, and I was like, damn. I was like, I knew some of the early stuff, but that is like a whole new level of skinny.
Totally, man. You talk about a lean ski, man.
Totally.
That's got like, body fat percentage in the negative territory.
Totally. That's funny.
So yeah, man, I would see those cats, and that was like my first trip here. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of rad. But, the two things that I kind of keyed in on, one was looking across the street, so looking across Little Cottonwood Canyon Highway at the south faces of Flagstaff, and seeing, and I couldn't quite figure out the whole skin track thing, but kind of seeing the switchback thing, and then like these big turns, and I was like, wow, what's going on over there, So it took me a minute or two to make that connection, and then as I was kind of connecting the dots with I would say a tenuous at best career at college, I made 2 more trips here, and then started to figure out a little bit more of the scene, that those switchbacks across the street were backcountry skiers, and they were telemark skiers, and you put these things on the bottoms of your skis, and you walked up and you pulled them off, and you wore beacons, and so at that time the early beacons were very early iterations of Peeps beacons, and everything was pretty primitive. I mean, people at that time were still skiing with Avalanche cords, right? So these were these big, long, kind of stringy cords that were like, I don't know, maybe 6 feet, 8 feet, and you'd ski them with those around your ankles. And then if you were buried, your partner would find that cord and then kind of dig following the cord, right? And yeah, talk about archaic.
Yeah,
right?
People these days that just got into it are probably like, what? Like you just went out with a cord that you dig the cord till you find the guy at the bottom.
Yeah, like what happens as that wraps around the trees, and then snaps and that kind of thing. So anyway, kind of the intersection then is after I scored a job at Snowbird, and I kind of get, embedded with kind of a young aggro crew, and most of the guys are in alpines, but about mid-season or so, my first season here, part of my crew starts to telly. And Josh, at that time, right, so we're talking like, mid or early to mid 80s, there was a pretty ripping crew by that time, both at Alta and at Snowbird. And my small posse started to kind of, wet their whistle with telemarking. But one thing I realized is like, there was this real advanced crew, and then it looked to me like the learning curve, man, took forever, because anybody I talked to, it's like, how long have you been telling? And they've been like, oh man, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. And quite frankly, they were flailing, I guess I sort of didn't get it, until the first time I got on a pair of Freeheel setup. And I had started touring with some randonnée stuff, and then dabbled with some Freeheel stuff. And so I had my first setup. I scored a pair of a solo boots, and they were sort of washed out and beat up, and I borrowed a pair of Rossignol randonnée. They were kind of a maroon colored ski, pair of 215s.
Yeah,
You remember?
I've got a pair here. Yeah, they're cool.
And I started skiing those, and I was like, man, number one, the thing that I realized very quickly with Telemark skiing. And it was a buddy of mine who shared this piece of advice, and he was a nighttime dishwasher in the steak pit at Snowbird. And at that time, man, I mean, it was like the true ski bump. So people were just eking by a living, and just living for a ski pass. And then you'd work your ass off on a summer job, and then come back to the resort and bang out 150 days or whatever. And that was sort of the cycle of life at that time. But I asked my friend Matt, I'm like, hey man, you've been Italian for a while, and he had this low, strong style. Not super clean, but really strong. And I was like, what's, if you had one piece of advice, and his piece of advice was, you stay low, you go, you stay high, you die. And
I love that.
I thought that was so pointed, so he had this really low, like I said, kind of aggro strong style, but I mean, he was sort of sloppy. And I was like, man, I could take a little bit of that and clean it up, and, kind of add a little bit more alpinism to it, more alpine style. And so just started to develop that and work on that. And I'll tell you, you realize pretty quickly, like when you are banging out, a day's worth of tele turns at a big resort like Alta or Snowbird. I mean, those places, especially on the gear that we had then, man, those places just eat you alive.
Oh, you guys must have been so fit. I mean, I can't even imagine like banging out 150 days in a season on that older gear, man. You guys must have been beasts.
The thing is, I mean, you would get so worked, but I think, you're in your 20s and you're really, you just don't realize it, so, I mean, it's just sort of the way of the world, and you bust it out. And, still in the back of my mind, even though I was having fun with that, I had this kind of notion and this allure that, number one, that if you were going to get the real sweet powder in the resort, you had to be on the patrol. And then really, if you wanted to get the first runs, you should be the guy out or gal out throwing the bombs and doing the snow safety work. So the Avalanche thing started to kind of, seep into my brain. And then the other part of it, well, then if you wanted to steer away from the resort, the backcountry would be the natural fit. So as I started learning more about snow and then scored a job at Brighton, that's where things really started to change and evolve in my career. And the first thing you realize about snow and avalanches is that, you don't know as much as you think about snow and avalanches. But what really turned the corner and really helped me form my career was in 1989, as I did a little revisit back to the University of Utah, there was a spring class, and it started in the spring semester, and it was given through the geology department, and it was taught by a guy named Peter Lev, and the name of the class was Snow Dynamics and Avalanche Forecasting. And I thought, oh, here we go, man. This should be pretty cool. Well, I sit in the class for the first 5 minutes, and Peter Lev rattles off his resume, welcomes everybody and rattles off his resume. And he was a lead heli guide with Mike Weegley in Canada, and an avalanche forecaster there, and an Alta ski patrolman at one point. And now he was lead forecaster for DOT and Little Cottonwood Canyon. And man, the light bulb goes off like, wow. I could make a living with avalanches and avalanche forecasting. And it was really Peter Lev, and man, God bless him. He really redirected my energies and my momentum, and helped open up a door for me, as far as helping me realize like there was this other life away from just ski patrolling, and away from the gratification of just powder skiing, and that you could actually make a living avalanche forecasting. So that sort of started my career down that road.
Wow, what a cool story. So was Peter Lev, was he pretty influential in creating like the Utah forecast and the forecast center, or was he kind of before that?
No, so Peter was around in the 70s, and actually, so the history behind the Utah Avalanche Center is that it actually started up at Alta, and so it was the forecasters who helped to forecast for the road and who interfaced with the resorts. So there was a number of different people up there. There was Ray Lindquist and Dwayne Bowles, and let's see who else was around. There was all of this early crew from Alta and Snowbird and Ed LaChapelle and Pat Lambros and Al Susi, and these people who were just at the right time, at the right place, Spink Sandal. And they thought that, we should record something on a phone line just to give people a heads up for backcountry conditions. So they started doing that in 1980 and started, kind of publishing this forecast that you would just dial up and get a little recording. And then eventually that moved into a bigger thing. So it moved out of Alta proper, and then moved down eventually to airport number 2, which is, you have the big main airport down in Salt Lake, and airport number 2 is a little private airport for private aircraft and helicopters. And so it continued down there under the auspices and tutelage of Pat Lambros and Al Susi. And there's so many other people that had been involved in helping to create the Avalanche Center and this message. And then, in the mid 80s, Bruce Tremper took over and had just an amazing 30-year career with the Utah Avalanche Center and really helped to steer it and guide it and create all the framework that it is today.
Wow. That's cool, man. That's really cool to hear. I didn't realize it went back that far. That's amazing.
It went back that far. So, to kind of come full circle with Pete, he was just, when I met him, he was lead forecaster for the UDOC program. He did some summer work. He was actually, his background was in numbers and weather and as a statistician. I mean, the guy was a really smart numbers guy. And he did some long-range weather forecasting and consulting on the side. And now I believe he's in Colorado. And, it's amazing how just one person in your life can really make a big difference. And boy, man, Pete just kind of opened up the door and opened up my mind to really an amazing career that I've been blessed with for over 30 years, and 20 of them with the Utah Avalanche Center. So it has just been a remarkable run, and truly every day that I go to work or I do something like this or I reflect on this career, man, I know I have been amazingly blessed.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. Well, and that's kind of when we kind of I feel like, so I taught skiing at Brighton in 1996-ish, somewhere around there. With Leslie. Leslie was my boss. You probably know,
right?
You probably know her. And
of course.
But yeah, I mean, back then I remember, I'm sure you're one of the old telly guys I saw, or well, you probably, weren't that old back then. I mean, that was a long time ago, but as a young high school kid, I mean, I remember growing up in the Wasatch and seeing a lot of the telly guys back then, or, just guys that had Freeheel gear and being like, wow, this is crazy. Cause it was a much different place too. Like you said, it's almost your experience of looking across Little Cottonwood and seeing skin tracks. I mean, that to me was my growing up here too. It was like, you'd see these guys pop. I remember taking the bus after high school to go work at Brighton, and you'd see these guys pop out on the side of the road.
Right.
Shout out to Wizard of the Wasatch too. Cause I remember seeing Bob Athey on the road all the time, dude. And I remember being like, who is that guy? I was like, this is crazy, like, so that was kind of my intro, seeing all those old telly people. And, but then, then when I opened the shop, we started doing little know before you go stuff. And that's kind of when I first got to really know you. And, can you maybe explain a little bit about when and why the Know Before You Go program happened? Like, cause how were you involved with that, and how did that all come about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got to, I got to reflect that. Yeah, it has been so cool that you have, introduced an evening basic Avi awareness presentation in your shop, because you've got a great following and a really cool posse. And man, as I say, it's really awesome to share the Avalanche gospel. And so the Know Before You Go program, I've been involved in avalanche education since my start at the Utah Avalanche Center, and even before then, when I was patrolling at Brighton. And so kind of my niche, or my toehold there was, and I'll circle back around to a little telly story. So as I started to become more proficient at telemarking and, avalanche control work and doing the snow safety work and avalanche forecasting, I realized that what would be more efficient is that, I work on my Freeheel gear, and I'd be able to move around a lot quicker. And so again, back into the, latter half of the 80s, where we're still sort of in that crossover leather plastic hybrid. So of course the Merrill super comps were the big boot at that time, and I started to part-time patrol in those, but I had an old school patrol director that I didn't. You know what? He equally hated telemark skiers as well as snowboarders, right? So
not much has changed, I don't think, in a lot of places.
Yeah, exactly. So either one, So I said, all right, well, how, and kind of the sticking point was that, you could never pull a toboggan down this mountain with a Freeheel. And I said, well, let's do this. How about we have a gentleman's agreement? If I can do it on the toughest run here, then I get to patrol on my pins. So I literally trained. And I said, all right, one day let's go. And I'm thinking we're going to go in one place, and we go into another place in really shitty snow and crusty snow and some slide for live stuff and everything, and like the biggest guy on the patrol. And I tell you, man, top to bottom, not that I didn't get worked, but I pull a guy down, full control, get down to the bottom, and I get sort of the tacit nod, like, okay, you're clear.
He was probably so pissed. He's
so pissed, right? So I get to do the patrol thing on pins, and at that time, snowboarding is also becoming pretty popular, and snowboarders are now starting to stream into the backcountry. And if we look at statistics, it's like every group that starts to get introduced to the backcountry, whether they're ice climbers, skiers, hunters, hikers, Boy Scout groups, snowboarders, snowmobilers, generally the trend is your gear and your skills far outweigh your avalanche knowledge. And that was the case, particularly in the late 80s, early 90s with snowboarders. And the boarders that were streaming out of the gates at Brighton, where I patrolled, there was no kind of peer-to-peer interaction, and nobody was talking to them about rescue gear or even, basic snow knowledge. And somehow, they saw me as kind of an alt kind of guy, a hippie kind of guy. Here I am on my pins, but I got a red coat and a white cross, and I'm different than everybody else. And I'm the guy out digging pits and throwing bombs. And we made a really nice connection. Or I made a really nice connection with that community. And snowboarders started asking me about avalanches and what was going on in the backcountry. So I started doing some just basic avalanche awareness presentations and basic avalanche, backcountry 101s for them and getting kids out on the snow. So there was a great connection there. And as we segued, into the 90s, and I moved on and I left Brighton and heli skiing and that kind of thing. I mean, the numbers kept on increasing, and I was into the Avalanche Center a couple of years, and we had a ginormous Christmas storm here on the Christmas day of 03, so the 03-04 season. And I mean, it's a massive, massive storm, right? And over the course of a couple of days, Salt Lake just gets pounded with 30 inches of snow. And it's the day after Christmas, and the storm is raging and snow is piling up. And, it's all resorts can do to stay open. And it's not necessarily because of the wind, but it's because of power outages, right? So raging storm, and down at Sundance, which is near Mount Timpanogos, they're doing all that they can to keep the resort open. And after a couple of power outages, they're like, all right, hey, lights out, day's over kind of thing. Well, 3 separate groups who don't even know each other roll up the road about 1.5 miles or 2 miles to the base of Mount Timpanogos, to the Aspen Grove trailhead. Now, the Aspen Grove trailhead instantly dumps you into avalanche terrain. And it doesn't dump you to the top of the ridge, but it dumps you to the run out of some of the biggest avalanche slopes in Utah. So there's tons of snow. The storm is still raging, and these 3 groups, and they're not even moving together, but they wind up on the same place under the steep north-facing slope of Mount Timpanogos. And above them, and unbeknownst to them, the real steep terrain above them is getting wind-loaded, and there's 3 big separate chutes or hanging snowfields. And as this group, there's about 14 people in 3 different groups, and as they're hiking up and in 3 dispersed groups, a natural slide comes down, knocks through 1 or 2 of the groups, and then 2 subsequent releases come out of these hanging snowfields, so sympathetically triggered avalanches. And at the end of the day, I mean, people are just getting washing machined, right? So they're above the snow, they're below the snow, they're spit out, they're caught, they're buried, and at the end of the day, 3 young men are buried and can't be found.
Wow.
And yeah, man, super heavy, super intense, day after Christmas. And it's like a couple hours into it, there's a massive search. 1 kid is found, and then about a week later, another kid is found, and then it's Easter, and finally the last young man is found.
Wow.
So, yeah, right?
That's heavy.
I mean, it's super heavy, and it makes... it's local news, big story. It's national news. It's international news. And, a lot of it has to do with it's the amount of people who are on the slope. There's a gentleman who is snowshoeing with his 2 kids and makes this frantic 911 call. And, it's just super, super heavy. And, we had the UAC, the Utah Avalanche Center, had a staff meeting shortly after that. And we were reviewing what happened. And, it's like, wow, this is just a trend. We're seeing more and more young people caught, carried, and killed in avalanches, where maybe just some rudimentary avalanche knowledge might save a life. So, looking at the forecast, wearing the proper gear, avoidance, that kind of thing. And I said to my boss, Bruce Tremper, I said, man, we got to do something. Why don't we do some sort of school program? And, Bruce was like, "Oh, we've tried that, and it really hasn't worked." I said, "Well, I mean, have you ever done video or anything?" And it's at a time, Josh, where there's very little video footage. I mean, this is like pre iPhones and pre
Yeah,
GoPros, and
this is '03, like yeah.
this is oh yeah,
Yeah,
oh
I mean, you think
three,
YouTube launched in like 2005 or 6. So yeah, it's like
right.
before YouTube.
Before YouTube, yes, yes. So footage is really hard to come by, and we go back and forth and back and forth. And after the meeting, I said to Bruce, I said, "You know what? This is something that really needs to be done." And he looked at me and said, "You come up with the money and go for it." And so I did. And I started knocking on doors and started talking to people. And one of the very first partners that got on board was backcountry.com. And that is a locally made, locally played entity, and kind of that was born out of a garage in Heber, and a couple of the original owners and partners are good friends of mine. One in particular, Bob Merrill, who's a ski buddy of mine, originally from the coast of New Jersey, and I stopped in and talked with them in their little office, and he's like, this is great timing, because we were thinking that we need to get some avalanche awareness out there. And so we kind of put our brains together, and they gave us some seed money. And then I went and talked with the cats at TGR. And, at that time, man, they had the most rad footage, and they were really stepping out. They were really getting after it. And let them know what my thoughts and my project ideas were. And, when they were filming a lot of their stuff, of course, they weren't out to trigger avalanches or have close calls, but in the course of their filming of, they had a lot of that kind of footage. So I talked to that crew up there, and, kind of threw out a Hail Mary pass, and they knew that the UAC, the Utah Avalanche Center, had huge credibility, and that we would be the ones to pull off a youth-based project as I proposed it. That this would be something that would go out to schools, that would do these big assembly-style kinds of avalanche education presentations, that there'd be a 15-minute video, it'd be like a rock and roll show, and then we segue into a PowerPoint presentation, and it would be dynamic, and there'd be lots of energy, and that was my vision. But the bigger vision was to make it simple, and to make it fun, and make it tangible, because I would have been that teenager at the back of the room being like, "Oh God, what's this guy talking about?" But if it was cool, and if it was rad, and it had some really solid substance, well then, maybe I could, even if I could change one person's habits, or influence, a handful of people, what their travel choices would be like, or that the Utah Avalanche Center existed, and there was this resource from them, well then at the end of the day, I've done something pretty good for my community. And so we put that together in the summer of 03-04, so the summer of 04, and launched it for the winter of 04-05. And the real impetus with this, of course, were those 3 young men that died. And I went back to their high school, which was in American Fork, Utah. And their vice principal, who knew these young men very well, he embraced the program, helped to get it in the schools for me. And we just started busting out, talk after talk after talk. The 04-05 season was a really robust snow season in Utah, and it started off out of the gates with a bang on October 17th with a couple feet of snow, lots of water. And that year, if you remember, Josh, Snowbird opened wall to wall, top to bottom. I mean, entire mountain, which was pasted white, opened up November 6th, and then ran through July 4th that year.
Yeah, I remember that.
Right?
For sure.
So, I mean, really, really epic year. Well, the other part of that year was that it was a huge avalanche year. We developed a weak layer in the snow around Thanksgiving, put a rain crust on top of that, and then had just storm after storm after storm, dense, heavy snow after that. And what that led to is a super dangerous setup and 8 fatalities that winter, and our average is 4 each winter. So I mean, we doubled our yearly average. Know Before You Go, the program that went to address avalanche concerns and avalanche safety, focusing on Utah's youth, was launched that year. I mean, the unfortunate part was that a lot of people died in the backcountry, but it was really the snow structure setup. But the fortunate thing was, here was this basic avalanche awareness program, Know Before You Go, premiering on a super active avalanche year. And what that did was, I mean, that propelled the thing into the galaxy. And, what was amazing that year, Josh, was like, we would roll into, I had this posse of ski patrolmen. And I mean, this thing was so untested and uncharted. And, you'd roll into a high school assembly of like 1,200 kids, and I mean, you had to create the energy and the stoke. And so it was like, it's like putting the Rolling Stones together. It was like, all right, this guy's going to be my bass player. Here's my lead guitar player, and so I surrounded myself with an amazing cast of characters: ski patrolmen, snow safety folks from Wasatch Backcountry Rescue, all who had the same vision as I did. And that was saving lives here in Utah, spreading the avalanche gospel, but not doing it in a Nancy Reagan, just say no to all of this. It's like, no, man, we know you're going to go out and ride. So here's the precautions you need to take. Here's the greatest resources you can go to. Here's the rescue gear you need. And, the biggest thing we wanted to see at the end of the day, as I still do, is that people are out enjoying the amazing snow that we get here in Utah, or anywhere for that matter, but doing it safely and knowing the days that you can pull a trigger and knowing the days that you really got to tone it down.
Yeah. I think one of the cool things too is, having been here during that era and not necessarily being involved in the snow safety aspect, but kind of from afar, watching how you've been able to, and the UAC has also been able to bring different user groups together. And that's always something that's been really impressive, because I think people sometimes, when you're a skier, sometimes if you don't live here, for instance, it's kind of like the snowmobile culture here in a lot of places. It's like a completely separate group of people. And I think you guys have done a good job. I mean, I know there's, and even like you said, now skiers and snowboarders are using approach vehicles sometimes. So there's kind of a crossover, but then there's like a lot of snow machine guys that are not skiers and snowboarders. And I think it's been cool to watch that culture even embrace the stuff that you guys are doing and utilizing safety equipment and, have avalanche education. That's been pretty cool to watch.
Yeah, totally. And you know what? It's interesting that's a great observation, man. And I thank you for those really kind words. I think Utah is in a very unique position. And one is that you have such great access to the mountains from Salt Lake. And you've got this metropolitan area that can be to a trailhead and world-class skiing, world-class mountains, world-class terrain in like 20 minutes. And, here the culture definitely does overlap, even though I think there are some, and certainly earlier on, go back a decade or two, more either misconceived or preconceived notions of motorized and non-motorized users. But, I think what we have been able to do at the UAC, and you pointed this out brilliantly, is that we've been able to take that idea of, oh, you ride this or you ride that, and we won't interact or interface, and turn that more into whatever you ride. You need this education and you need this information. And The snowmobile community really embraced this, and it didn't happen overnight. All of these inroads have been very hard work and keying in with the right people. And as I started to educate and get more embedded in the snowmobile community, and it was in that 04-05 season, a very well-respected, well-loved, experienced all-mountain rider was killed in the January avalanche cycle of 04-05. And, I think the snowmobile community at that time, especially locally here, was really blown away that a person that they knew who had been in the mountains for decades and knew snow and knew how to ride and was at the top level of his riding, that he was killed in an avalanche. It just, the community here just had a hard time wrapping their arms around that. And I think the take-home point was, well, if it happened to Dave, it could have happened to any one of us. And that's really where we saw the snowmobile community really embrace the avalanche gospel and the avalanche message. And it has just been a remarkable thing here, because anybody that heads out on the snow now knows that, hey, if you want avalanche knowledge, if you want the latest advisory, if you want to find a class, if you want to watch a cool video, you go to the Utah Avalanche Center website, utahavalanchecenter.org. And man, it's just been such an amazing run. Like I said earlier in the conversation, I feel super blessed to have been at this juncture in time and been so involved in the way the Avalanche Center has evolved and the way that message has evolved.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, and kind of segueing into this winter, I mean, I think we were talking right before we started. I mean, I think everyone knows, like, there's kind of this unknown, lots of unknowns. Like, we don't know, are the resorts going to be open? Are they going to open and then close? I think One thing everybody does know is there's a really high probability that backcountry skiing is going to be the most reliable option. So
exactly, yeah.
So I'm kind of curious, like, from an avalanche professional standpoint, there's so many people. We see this even in Salt Lake. It's funny because when I opened up Freeheel Life Telemark shop, everyone's like, oh, it's a backcountry shop. And I'm like, no. It's a Telemark shop. And actually our backcountry users only make up a small portion. And so there's an enormous amount of people utilizing Telemark as a turn in bounds and not actually have experienced this idea of walking uphill and traveling through the mountains. So and I know it's, short format for this, but where can people start to, think about avalanche terrain? Do they need to take a class? Is there an online version of, know before you go? Like, what are your suggestions going into this season?
Yeah, so great stuff here. And yeah, obviously the COVID has just thrown such a curveball, such a massive redirection of so many thought processes. I mean, aside of the tragedy of all the lives that have been affected, I mean, I feel like the ski and the snow kind of thing are really first world problems, but of course they are our first world problems, right? So the first thing that I think about is that our decision making, has to be very, very well thought out. And the first thing we got to think about is that our decisions don't impact anybody else and don't stress out any of our healthcare workers or the healthcare system. So that's first things in place. Now, the way that you can move forward in the unknown here, and I totally agree with you that backcountry will be busier than ever. We saw that last spring. And as I segue back to last spring, in both the March and particularly the mid-April snow and avalanche cycles, storm and avalanche cycles, I mean, we saw literally dozens and dozens of unintentionally human-triggered avalanches, near misses, and close calls. I mean, remarkably close calls, to where any one of a handful of near misses or close calls could have resulted in a fatality, could have easily resulted in somebody not walking away at the end of the day. So that's that last year, after everything closed down, I mean, that was just basic storm snow.
Right.
That isn't like going into the beginning of the season where maybe we have a weak layer near the ground and you have a robust storm system and things are tricky. I mean, that's straightforward stuff. That's Avalanche 101. So if we're not getting it on those levels and on those terms, man, we really got to reel it back. And so part of reeling it back right now is get grounded, take an avalanche class, the Know Before You Go class, which will be given, I think to start off, probably we'll be doing some virtual engagements. Know Before You Go is a basic, 50-minute to an hour-long presentation. It gives you the basics, So by the end of that class, of course, you'll know how to spell avalanche, and that is with an E on the end. And you'll know that you need, beacon shovels, probes, and maybe an airbag. And you'll know that you need further education and to check the forecast before you go out and stay off of and out from under steep slopes when the hazard is elevated. So you'll have some basic and some rudimentary education. But as you start to move around into the backcountry, you're going to need a little bit more than that. Now, that doesn't mean that every time it snows or every time that you're thinking about heading into the backcountry, you want to retreat and hide under your bed. I mean, you can be out enjoying this 7 days a week. The main emphasis, though, is match your terrain with what the avalanche hazard is. So, on a considerable or a high hazard day, figure out where that avalanche dragon lives. If it's, living on the north half of the compass and there's a low hazard on south facing slopes, well, it's pretty easy to put together, right? So I usually figure that when we have early season snow and it goes a long period without any subsequent storms or snow, you're going to develop weak layers in the snowpack. You put dense, heavy snow, wind-driven snow on top of that, you're going to start to see avalanches. So have some basic rudimentary understanding with how avalanches work, the terrain that you can still ride, but definitely the terrain that you want to avoid. Use your local avalanche forecast center here in Utah, utahavalanchecenter.org. It's going to be your best resource to get some data on the places that you can still go to and places that you want to avoid. And then moving forward, we've actually got a great 3-evening seminar coming up. So the Utah Snow and Avalanche Workshop this year will be its 13th annual event. And generally, Josh, what we do at that, we've been holding that and at an expo center in Salt Lake. About 600 or 700 people attend that. Of course, this year that's not going to be happening. So we're retooling it to an online platform. It's going to be streaming live, and we're going to be streaming that in mid-November, November 11th, 12th, and 13th, live from Petzl in Salt Lake City. And that event is from 6:30 to 8:30 each night, so 3 nights. And those 3 nights, it's going to be a little bit more advanced avalanche education. So we'll have a night of tech talk and snow pits and some of the things that are out there in the tech world. We'll have a night with where we're focusing on how we tend to get distracted and disorganized in the backcountry. And then we're going to have a final night on some decision making for the upcoming year and really how we can navigate as a community. It's not just a one-person thing and it's not a one-entity thing, man. We're a community. And much like the UAC has got your back and has everybody's back in the backcountry, of course, as a community, we should expect that from everybody that's that's a participant out there. So I encourage people to, again, go to UtahAvalancheCenter.org, tune in for those dates, and that's going to be November 11th, 12th, and 13th. And you can help support that program. And that's going to be a little bit more advanced education. And then as the season starts to evolve and gel together, just stay on top of things, know what the hazard is. And really the biggest thing is to match your terrain with what the hazard is. It's really hard to look in the crystal ball and figure out what the resort scene is going to be. But remember, especially early season or after resorts close, no avalanche control takes place. So, number one, know what the uphill policy is at a closed resort. Some resorts are on public lands and they freely allow you to walk up and ski down. Others are on private land, so know what that uphill policy is. And then, secondly, man, you're headed out, you got to have all the gear: beacon, shovels, probes. Definitely have some avalanche education under your belt, and definitely be tuned into the latest avalanche advisory.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's a really good place to start people off. And yeah, maybe we'll have to talk once we get closer to the season. And we with the COVID thing, we might have to do a little virtual know before you go with you at the shop or something like that.
Yeah, totally. No, I would totally be stoked for that.
Yeah.
And that would be something that, globally and galactically, I mean, all your listeners, all your viewers could tune into. And, I want to circle back to Know Before You Go's successes, because it was just reminded me, it was a little bit of an incomplete thought that in the first year after we launched Know Before You Go in 2004, 2005, I was hoping maybe we would talk to maybe 3,000 or 4,000 kids, and that year we wound up talking to 12,000 kids. And then the next year it gained even more popularity. It was like 18,000 kids, and we got it into the school system here in Utah as an elective in health and PE. And then it has just grown exponentially since. We have our third version of the Know Before You Go video, which we partnered with Red Bull Media to help us out with. And Travis Rice was a big help and a big hand in that. And, fast forward to today, Know Before You Go is the worldwide basic avalanche awareness class that is given globally. And as of, I think, our last iteration, it has been translated in 12 different languages. So, it's pretty bitchin', man.
That is amazing.
Again, locally played, locally made here in Utah, and guaranteed it's saving lots of lives. So I know it's a successful program, and I see folks now who are in their 30s who come up to me at a grocery store or a concert like, "You're the dude that came to our high school," and now my kids are going to that class. So it is so rad. It is so rewarding. And, the bottom line, man, is that I know it gives a lot back to the community, and I know it saves lives.
No, I love that, man. Well, I'll definitely put a link to the event at Petzl. I think that'll be good for people to check out.
Absolutely.
And I'll make sure to put a link to your Instagram too, because I was gonna say, and you may not think it's cool, but you put more turns in. and so I mean this in a literal sense, is if you go to the most OG on Instagram, you stack in more turns per foot than I think anybody in the Wasatch, and everyone knows who was there. So,
well, thanks for that. Dude, I have always seen snow as a canvas and as a medium of self-expression. So I guess with that said, if you saw my turns, you're like, this guy's got some sort of OCD problem.
It's true snow farming.
But no, Josh, it has just been such a fun, rewarding run, and man, man, so stoked that you're helping to share this message and helping to spread the stoke. And another way that people can help support the Utah Avalanche Center, and again, kind of in this COVID age, man, things are different. And in September, we would generally have our annual backcountry fundraiser. And this would be and is going to be our 27th annual. But things are looking a little different. What we generally do is good partner, both Black Diamond Equipment and Uinta Brewing, would help host that. We'd pile 1,000 people into the Black Diamond parking lot. There'd be a big party, a lot of interaction, a lot of people. Lot of hand kissing and baby shaking, or
something
or
like
baby
that.
kissing and handshaking, whichever way you roll. And this year it's going to look a little different. So for your Utah listeners, you could still participate that. And what we've got going on are these party pods or party packs where you host a party at your house. We've got different ways that, whether it's just a significant other or family or your powder posse, you can get them together. All of the information is on UtahAvalancheCenter.org, but you got to get going on that soon. Deadline for that closes September 3rd. We're shipping things out, but we've got great stuff with Uinta sponsored beers and dinner packages. And so I encourage all your listeners, go to UtahAvalancheCenter.org, support a great benefit, support a great cause, and support the crew that keeps people here in Utah on top of the greatest snow on earth.
I love that, man. Hey, well, thank you for all you're doing, man. I know you're making all of us better, the snow community better. And me personally, I have always been grateful that you support our Telemark shop and our Telemark community.
Yeah.
And I know that we have a tight bond now that you can find Riva 2 parts and Red T1s from the late 1990s. So
yeah, I am in. And to all of your crew, man, it is so cool to see both a resurgence as well as embracing the renaissance of freeheel skiing, and so many people kind of transition into going with lighter AT gear and that kind of thing. But man, it's all about the turn, and it's all about not having your heel locked down. And Josh, while I love the Avalanche gig and all of that, dude, my heart, of course, is always in the turn, and it's always in the mountains, and it's always, embracing the simplicity and the nuance of freeheel skiing. So thanks for keeping that alive, brother.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, with that, I'll make sure to put links to all that. Thanks for coming on, man, and we'll definitely catch up and try to do a little gig at the shop here this winter. And I wish you all the best this winter. We'll pray for snow.
Let's pray for snow. Let's keep everybody on top of the snow, and let's circle back around midwinter. I just want to tell your listeners that they're tuned in to an awesome podcast here. They're tuned into an awesome message, and just keep on supporting the people that make this all happen.
Awesome. Thanks, brother.
All right. Peace out, my friend. You have a great day, man.
You too, man. Peace out. See ya.
Cheers.
Man, what an awesome conversation that was with my brother, Craig Gordon. He's an amazing guy, and we are so fortunate to have him here in the Wasatch, and I'm so glad that I could share it with you guys out there because, it's one of those things where, sometimes, when you grow up in a place and we got the shop in Salt Lake, sometimes it's like you don't even, we know these people and we're having these experiences, but it's really cool to be able to share it now to all of you out there. And I think, like we were saying, I think there's an amazing opportunity, despite the COVID stuff, to reach out virtually to a lot of people and have you guys be able to experience some of this awesomeness that we get to have here. So with that said, how you can support us, you can always support our content. If you like the work that I'm doing and the work that we are doing at the shop, you can make a donation of your choice to paypal.me/freeheellife. Telemark gear, we got it. And we want to be your preferred Telemark shop. As I always say, We want to be the best and serve you guys out there worldwide. Check out freeheellife.com. We got new gear, used gear, and we'll be restocking up on a bunch of stuff coming up here pretty soon. For news, gear reviews, and stories, you can go to telemarkskier.com. And you can always email me directly at podcast@freeheellife.com. Love you guys. Thank you for listening this week. And until next week, spread Telemark always.